started. Buenas tardes, good afternoon to everyone. We thank you for being with us here for an hour today for this presentation on Latino Family Voices, a presentation of some preliminary findings from our 2022 National Latino Family Survey. My name is Adrián Pedroza. I'm the Executive Director of Abriendo Puertas, Opening Doors. First, I'd like to thank each of you for the work you do every day as facilitators, as nonprofit organizations, educators, philanthropy, faith-based organizations, and of course, parents and caregivers. Each of you are committed to ensuring the well-being of our families and children, and we are honored to be your partners in this work. At Abriendo Puertas Opening Doors, we work with many of you and the approximate 300 organizations across 41 states to invest our time and resources in the leadership of parents, caregivers, and families. Our collective work is to ensure the lifelong well-being of children starting in the earliest years before the age of 6 and in prenatal stages. Today, in partnership with our friends at UnidosUS and BSP Research, we will be elevating stories and data as told by parents and caregivers. You'll be among the first to hear these early findings as we conduct a national listening campaign that includes focus groups, interviews, and this survey. By centering our work around our lived experiences as families who want the brightest future for our children, we and our partners at UnidosUS are working toward building a national Latino infant initiative together with you, our partners, and families. You will be hearing more about this initiative in the coming months, so stay tuned, and we invite you to join us in this essential work. It's estimated that here in the US, the Hispanic or Latino population has reached 62 million. That's 1 in 5 people in the US. This is inclusive of the 28 million who identify as multiracial, speaking to the diversity of our community. What we also know is that newborns are driving this recent growth at approximately 1 million Latino Hispanic babies being born each year. Our youth and our diversity are our strength in this country, but only if we listen, build solutions together, and invest in the well-being of families and children. We are fortunate to have with us here today 2 presenters, but more importantly, collaborators in this work. And I'd like to go ahead and share their bios now as we get started. First, we'll have Dr. Gabe Sanchez, who in addition to his role at BSP Research is a professor of political science and the founding Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Endowed Chair in Health Policy at the University of New Mexico. Dr. Sanchez is also the director of the UNM Center for Social Policy and a founding member of the University of New Mexico Native American Budget and Policy Institute. Dr. Sanchez is also a Rubenstein Fellow in Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution. Professor Sanchez is a nationally recognized expert in survey research and the utilization of rigorous research to inform public policy decisions at the federal, state, and local levels. Then we'll have Amalia Chamorro, who will provide some additional comments and takeaways after the presentation. Ms. Chamorro leads education policy for UnidosUS, formerly National Council of La Raza, or NCLR. They are the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights and advocacy organization. Her work encompasses early childhood education, K through 12, and higher education. In this role, Amalia provides strategic direction and manages activities for the education policy team. Her work focuses on closing opportunity gaps and advancing equity for Latino students and English learners at both federal and state levels. Now, as we move into the presentation, I would first like to center this conversation we're having today by bringing in the voice of some incredible parents and caregivers who we were very fortunate to be able to interview separately from this national survey. We interviewed them about their needs of their families and children with the focus on childcare. These interviews with Myla, Yasmin, Dottie, Yolanda, and Jasmine were conducted as part of a project that we did in California with the Advancement Project, now known as Catalyst California, and an incredible network of family serving organizations that also contributed to this work. We're very thankful to these families and to this network for sharing their stories with us here today.
My main concern when I look for daycare is something that I can afford, and something that a place where my kids are safe, that I can trust.
I don't know if you guys can hear me because my son is talking over me. For me, if I know like my child is meeting her developmental needs and I know she's being taught something, there's better care. With my daughter, what I needed most was like more like support.
I want to make the best choices for me and my child. Clear communication is vital when I'm looking for childcare, and consistency.
With the childcare provider, I was looking for stability, communication, and level of care that he was going to receive. We're looking for somebody that we can trust. A certificate doesn't make you a good care provider, right? That's just a piece of paper saying you attended the classes, you did what you had to do. It's compassion, right? It's building character. If you invest in a person, they're going to project that to the child.
Finding childcare is my biggest challenge. Typically, it's expensive. I just lost my job because I don't have childcare again. That's happened to me like 4 times since I had him. If there was more opportunity in this area, it would definitely benefit me and him, because then I could go to work and be able to afford not just the things we need right now. We'd be able to afford things that, we want, things that he wants. You know what I mean? It's not just diapers and wipes anymore. And we won't be struggling anymore.
I think the parent knows best for their kids. So I think they should listen to their parents because they know their child more than a person that's making the laws. And every child and every parent has a different experience.
It would change my life if there was more accessible childcare.
It takes dedication. When you take kids on, it's a lot of responsibility, and every child is different. It makes a big difference when the child is acknowledged.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Adrián, for that powerful video to provide some context to the numbers that I'll share with you, and for the wonderful introduction that you provided for the conversation that we'll have with you folks today. As Adrián noted, my name is Gabe Sanchez. I'm representing BSP Research, who is the trusted data partner for this collaboration. And it's an absolute pleasure to be able to produce the overall results that I'll share with you today on behalf of 2 of the biggest organizations that work on behalf of the Latino population here in the United States, Abriendo Puertas and UnidosUS. I've already enjoyed this partnership and look forward to the work ahead as we continue to shed light on some of the challenges that Latino families are facing across the country and some of the solutions that they'd like to see improve their everyday lives. This is Latino Family Voices, results from the 2022 National Latino Family Survey. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the survey methodology or specifications with you today. I'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions you might have about that in Q&A, but want to draw your attention to a few points. One is the large sample size of 1,300 Latino parents, primary caregivers, including grandparents and other family members for the primary caregivers, as well as expecting families. Overall, you see 2.7 margin of error across the full sample size. And probably more importantly, the recency of this data was filtered from September 6th through October 4th. So it's very recent, fresh data to be able to provide perspective from the voices of Latino families across the country. This was collected in both web-based and telephone interviews. At BSP, we have fully bilingual interviewers, so respondents could take the survey in either English or Spanish, or move back and forth between languages depending on their preference. And the survey had oversamples of New Mexico and Los Angeles County. So I'm breaking this up in terms of some major themes that emerged from the data. The first will be the economic challenges and priorities of the Latino population. Obviously, this is a very difficult time for Latino families in particular, with the rising cost of living, the rising cost of housing, et cetera, that are really, as we'll see from the data, putting an economic strain on Latino families and forcing them to make some very difficult decisions. We had a number of different indicators in the survey to try to track what the economic realities are for the Latino population right now in the United States. And you see from the first slide, probably the most basic we asked folks is during the past year. So note, this is specific to the past year. Have you had to do any of the following to manage your financial situation specifically due to the price increases and the rise in cost of living. You see that nearly 40% of respondents indicated that they've had to borrow money from friends or family to manage their financial situation in the past year. 1/3 of the sample has had to use up all or most of their savings already. And nearly 1/3 of all Latino families across the country have had to postpone their child's activities specifically because of the expense. So whether you look at those indicators, the fact that we've seen, unfortunately, many families having to turn to high interest rate title or loan companies to manage their financial situation. At the end of the day, unfortunately, Latino families are having to make very difficult decisions that might actually put them into more economic harm in the long term to manage the immediate emergencies that they're facing as a consequence of the rising cost of living, not only happening here in the United States, but globally. And one thing that I'd like to point out is, given the fact that we're coming off of a very difficult economic year already, the fact that you're seeing such eye-popping numbers in the past year indicates, unfortunately, that Latinos have already burned through whatever nest egg they had available to weather this difficult financial storm, and unfortunately have no other lifeline to lean on as things potentially are going to continue to be challenging for the Latino population in particular. Other thing I'd like to point your attention to is, unfortunately, we're seeing a sizable segment, 17% of Latino families overall, who are relying on food banks, pantries, or other avenues to manage food insecurity challenges they're facing as a result of the rise of cost of living. With the large sample size of 1,300 respondents to work with, we have the ability to cut the data to look at nuances across the diverse Latino population on any of the different items that I'm going to share with you today. First and foremost, we want to look at whether or not any particular segments of the Latino population are facing greater economic challenges in the context of the past year's increases in overall cost of living. And you see that in particular expecting families, so the youngest in terms of families with children that are on the way, are unfortunately facing even greater economic challenges than the population at large. You see that population marked in yellow in the bar chart in front of you, much greater, 16% higher rate of borrowing money from friends or family, more likely to having to postpone or cut back on their family or children's activities, higher likelihood of applying for a loan or a bank from a credit union, and again, higher likelihood of skipping a monthly car rent or mortgage payment. So across a number of these indicators, you see that our youngest families, those that are potentially facing the greatest increase in their overall family spending dynamic with a baby on the way, are more likely to be feeling the financial strain. When we look at language differences across the population, you see that Spanish-speaking families, those that predominantly speak Spanish in the home, are more likely to have used up all or most of their savings to help pay for their family's expenses. The survey also had the ability to look at long COVID experiences across Latino families in the United States. Overall, we found that roughly 1/4 of the Latino family population across the United States either has a parent or primary caregiver or a combination of a child in the home that's dealing with long COVID experiences. Those are overall symptoms associated with COVID can last weeks or months for families. And unfortunately, as you see in front of you, those families that are experiencing long COVID are more likely to be facing a number of these economic challenges, whether that be borrowing money from friends or family, skipping a monthly car rent or mortgage payment, postponing or quitting education, etc. And the reason why I want to draw your attention to this particular subgroup of the overall Latino family population is, unfortunately, we found that a large segment of these folks that are facing long COVID have indicated that they've either already faced challenges with their employer because of missing time for work or are in danger of losing their job as a consequence of the experience with long COVID. So unfortunately, we see, although it's a challenging time economically for all Latino families, some specific segments are even having a more challenging or difficult time. One broad indicator of the economic well-being being very vulnerable for Latino families across the country right now, we asked folks directly over the past 12 months, would you say that your own economic situation has gotten better, gotten worse, or stayed roughly the same? You see roughly 36%, so a little over 1/3 of all Latino families across the country have seen their financial situation get worse in the past 12 months. And again, that's a powerful data point given how challenging the year before this one has been for Latino families that we've seen documented across a number of different surveys, including those from BSP Research. So the fact that things have gotten even worse for these families is a strong indicator of the challenging times that unfortunately many Latino families are having financially. We also see a number of other indicators of economic fragility for Latino families across the country, including almost 40% of the full sample being extremely concerned that they will not be able to provide a good future for their children. Again, I'll restate that given the powerful nature of that data point. Almost 40% of the full sample is extremely concerned, not just concerned, but extremely concerned that they will not be able to provide a good future for their children. Nearly 1/3 at 31% are extremely concerned that they will not have enough food to eat every day. So we've seen countless indicators from research over the past several years that unfortunately many Latino families are facing food insecurity, and unfortunately that situation is trending in the wrong direction, getting worse instead of getting better. You see also a sizable segment of the population at 37% are extremely concerned that they will not be able to keep up with basic expenses like rent, mortgage, or utilities, again, due to either layoff or pay cuts due to the rise of cost of living. So again, sobering data that indicates that across a number of different measures in the survey, Latino families are in a very vulnerable state in terms of their overall economic well-being. Not surprisingly, given the numbers that I've shared with you, when we asked the full sample, what are the most important issues facing the Latino or Hispanic community that you think the government should address? You see the economy is the most salient issue facing the Latino community, with nearly 1/5 of respondents citing also that education is one of the most important issues for the government to address. So even though we're seeing the economy, the address of the rising cost of living or inflation, improving wages and income being the top 3 in terms of issue saliency, the fact that education is a top priority to Latino families indicates just how powerful and strong of a priority education is for Latino families in particular. You also see at 15% addressing gun violence and mass shootings is a top priority for Latino families. I'm a pollster who's been tracking the Latino population, the electorate, for the better part of the last 15 years. I've never seen addressing gun violence and mass shootings as high in terms of issue saliency as we see it today, a data point that I'll return back to later in the presentation. We also see some indicators, unfortunately, in the survey that many Latino families are facing challenges gaining access to resources that are incredibly valuable right now for many Americans, including Latino Americans. Unfortunately, approximately 1/4 of Latino parents or primary caregivers do not have health insurance, either for themselves or for their children. We've all learned how valuable access to health insurance is during the pandemic. In fact, in the research that I've conducted specifically with Latinos, we know that access to health insurance is one of the #1 drivers to be able to have access to vaccination, both for adults and their children. And so not having access to insurance right now, particularly in the context of long COVID and COVID continuing to be a disproportionate challenge for Latinos, is a really important issue that we all should be advocating to our policymakers to do something about in terms of public policy interventions. And unfortunately, nearly 50% of Latinos in the full sample have indicated that they've been denied or terminated from TANF or SNAP benefits. So again, shedding a light on the important challenge of some basic lifeline resources that unfortunately far too many Latino families are having to go without, whether in the context of public benefits like TANF or SNAP, or access to health insurance. These are important indicators of, again, the fragility of the economic well-being of Latinos in particular, not unfortunately being able to be intervened with basic resources that they have access to and should be able to utilize. Shifting to another major theme for this particular survey, again, our target population were Latino families who had children 5 years of age or younger, including expected families. So we wanted to take advantage of that particular subgroup of the population to track a number of different needs and priorities among Latino families specific to early childhood programming and services. One of the many measures in the survey that provided us some utility to think through what are the needs and priorities specific to early childhood. You see, we asked parents specifically about their children's early development and education, and what are the 2 most important issues they think that the government should address. You see, child safety is the highest priority for Latino parents and primary caregivers, followed by access to quality childcare. Also, you see sizable segments of the Latino family population indicating the cost of college tuition is a key priority, as well as access to quality pre-K programming. When we look at a number of different ways to cut the data, here we wanted to isolate expecting families. Again, I've never seen samples really hone in on that particular subgroup of the Latino population. And you see when we cut the data in that way, we find that expecting families are more inclined to find that education-related parent engagement and support is a high priority, as well as access to technology. Obviously, access to technology has become a greater need for Latino families across the country, as education and overall access to different resources have moved to a digital format. And unfortunately, all of you, I'm sure, are aware that Latinos, as well as Native Americans, are two of the communities across the country that face the biggest digital divide challenges in being able to get access to high speed or Wi-Fi in their homes. We asked a number of different questions specific to childcare and priorities that Latino families in particular want to see available to them. You see across this first cut of the data, we look at a number of different priorities that emerged as really important to Latino families, including having access to well-trained and experienced educators and caregivers who can be trusted to keep their children safe and healthy. You saw from the video clip that Adrián shared with us, coming from the mouths and voices specifically of Latino parents across the country, that they emphasize it's not just credentials that and really provides trust for Latino families. It's the fact that they're experienced educators and caregivers who can be trusted to keep their children safe and healthy. So that directly correlates with what we see with the survey data. We also find that having a strong reputation is a priority for Latino parents when they're looking for childcare, and affordability among the top priorities that what we found in the survey are things that Latinos look for when they're shopping or considering childcare options. We also asked if any of the following are important when considering your child's care or your child's childcare options in particular. And here we found that fresh and nutritious foods, and particularly thinking about the opportunity for their child to learn how to socialize with other children, are key priorities. This morning, I was reading a number of different research reports that specifically emphasize for Latino families having opportunities to ensure that their children have socialization opportunities is incredibly important, particularly obviously given the context for many children losing those opportunities over the past 2 to 3 years because of COVID. Being able to have access to those resources are incredibly important, not just for Latinos, but all families across the country right now. We also see that over a third of Latino families indicate that they want to see their child have access to childcare with bilingual learning and play opportunities. We know from a number of different overwhelmingly powerful data and research reports that children at a very young age who have access to bilingual learning and play will see benefits over the duration of their lifetime in terms of the brain development that is associated with those bilingual opportunities. We also find that parents highly value communication opportunities with their childcare providers about learning and development. You see, when we ask folks to indicate how important each of the following are to their childcare provider opportunities, particularly in regards to being able to have communication, we see that ranging from 70% who indicated it was important to them that they have communication opportunities about the progress and the challenges their child is making in their learning and development, to 63% setting goals with their provider for their child's learning and development opportunities, across the board to seeing that there's high support for being able to learn more in terms of communication with their providers in ways that they themselves, as parents or primary caregivers, can provide support to their child's learning and development at home. You see the take-home messages. Latino parents and primary caregivers want more avenues for direct communication with their providers about the learning and development of their child. Respondents are also very highly interested in a number of different resources concerning their children's activities and public assistance. So we asked a whole range of different programming or services that might be available to them. I'm showing you those that emerged as the most important or most salient to Latino parents in the overall sample. You see that whether it's discounts on extracurricular activities or information and resources on government programs, ranging from SNAP, WIC, etc., to opportunities to get access to discounted or free school supplies to support their overall children's educational opportunities. All of these are main priorities for Latino families, but some that you might not necessarily associate with Latino families, particularly in the context of early childhood. You see that a quarter of the Latino sample indicates that having access to goal setting for their own education and job skills development, as well as their children's development, are key priorities. And I think that makes sense given some of the economic challenges that I shared with you in terms of the challenges facing Latino parents right now. Having opportunities to improve their own economic well-being is crystal clear as an opportunity for these parents to be able to support the long-term financial stability of their families. We also asked a number of different indicators of specifically the parents or primary caregivers' attitudes around where child learning begins in the household, as well as some of the social development opportunities that they view as important. You see that overall, parents believe that child learning begins in the first year of their child's life. In fact, that tend to be the modal category when we ask folks, when does this actually occur? That is an indicator that Latino parents are very highly informed about early childhood development, because that jives and correlates very nicely with what the research suggests as the primary opportunity for brain development occurring with young children. And we also see when we ask folks to provide on a scale of 1 to 10, what are the most important to them in terms of their child's development, you see almost a perfect 10 in terms of that scale is reading and comprehension and overall understanding. You also see at almost 9 on a scale of 1 to 10, social and emotional development. Again, Latino families are aware of the importance of that social development and their children's overall well-being. And you also see the importance placed on vocabulary. And I'll emphasize that we saw in the larger data when folks are talking about vocabulary, they're indicating that is an opportunity in both English and Spanish that is important to their overall child's well-being and development. You see overwhelming support for Latino parents and primary caregivers across a number of different programs that can be utilized to support early childhood development, especially, and I want to draw your attention to increasing compensation for childhood educators. You see almost every single respondent in the survey indicated that it was important to them to see increases in the compensation of early childhood educators, both in terms of salaries and benefits. I want to emphasize that as an important intervention because not only does it support the overall child development associated with maintaining quality staff in terms of the early childhood sector, but I'm sure many of you are aware of the fact that when we look at the early childhood workforce, it tends to be highly populated with Latinas and African-American females. And so if we focus on that intervention, not only will it benefit the overall early childhood ecosystem, but will also support the financial well-being of all of those Latinas who work in that sector if they did see increases in their salary and their overall benefits. But you see a number of other interventions that are almost completely supported by Latino parents in the sample, ranging from increasing funding for parent and family engagement, increasing funding for early Head Start to make this more available for all children. You see at the end of the day, Latino parents and primary caregivers will support most initiatives and policy interventions that will actually increase and enhance the early childhood ecosystem in the United States. Another theme that jumped out to us as we looked at cutting the data, again, you folks are among the first to be able to see the results from this really groundbreaking survey, was gun violence, racism, and unfortunately mental health challenges that are high concerns for Latino families. This is one of the most sobering statistics that I'll share with you, and unfortunately indicates that this is an unfortunate reality for many Latinos across the country. You see that nearly 1/5, that 18% of respondents have either themselves or their children been at school or a public place during a violent shooting incident. And I want to emphasize, this is not seeing this on television or seeing news reports of violence. This is direct experience either being at a school or public place during a violent shooting incident. So the fact that nearly 1/5 of respondents overall indicate this has been a reality for them should be something that we should all be very, very concerned with. The fact that it's even higher at 28% for the youngest families, those that are expecting a child, right? We need to think through what are the mental health implications of this unfortunate reality for far too many Latinos across the country. So this is, again, very sobering data that unfortunately paints a picture of a very dark reality for far too many Latinos across the country. Consequently, a majority of parents, at 62%, are extremely concerned that their child could be a victim of a mass shooting at some point over their lifetime. And in fact, you see nearly all Latino parents or primary caregivers are concerned at some level of, unfortunately, their child themselves being a victim of a mass shooting. Again, emphasizes just how much of a reality this is for far too many Latino families across the United States. As a result of this unfortunate reality, we see that 90% of respondents find it important or very important for policymakers to reduce mass shootings. When we asked a number of different follow-up questions in terms of what they would support to try to do something about this reality in the United States, you see overwhelming support for a number of different policy interventions, whether it's indicating that there should be mandatory or universal background checks for all firearm sales. You see at 91%, whether it's 84% who support laws covering the sales of guns in their states to be more strict. You see at the end of the day, Latino parents and primary caregivers overwhelmingly support very commonsensical policy solutions to try to do something about this sharp increase in mass shootings and gun violence that we're all witnessing across the United States. The next theme that I want to draw your attention to are the fact that, unfortunately, far too many Latino families face discrimination experiences in the United States just for being Latino. And what I'll share with you is that when we say discrimination experience for Latino families, we don't mean just the parents and primary caregivers, but unfortunately, this is becoming a reality for far too many children across the United States. I'll share some of the data points from this theme from the larger survey. In fact, we've seen that nearly 1/3 of Latino respondents have indicated that they face discrimination recently just for being Latino in public places, at work, and from law enforcement. In fact, you see that 28% of the full sample indicated in the past 12 months alone, they've experienced discrimination or been treated unfairly strictly because they are Latino or Hispanic, right? So this is not discrimination for a number of other avenues that could direct you to unfair treatment in the United States. It's specifically a result of Latino or Hispanic ethnicity. You also see that 22% of the full sample indicated that they've been called offensive names or told to go back to another country. 1 in 5 at 20% indicated that they've been criticized for speaking Spanish, again, in public places or at their place of employment. And you see 17% indicate that they've experienced discrimination or been treated unfairly because they are an immigrant or people assume that they're an immigrant. So a very unfortunate reality in the United States that far too many Latinos are being treated unfairly or singled out solely because they are Latino or Hispanic. When we asked individuals where have they experienced this discrimination, you see far too many folks are facing discrimination experiences just living their everyday lives in public places like stores, parks, or unfortunately at 27% dealing specifically with law enforcement or authorities. We know from other research that when Latinos in particular face unfair discrimination, specifically from law enforcement, it leads to a number of unfortunate outcomes, including a lack of trust to be able to call law enforcement when you need help or you need to actually call for reporting a crime. So we know, unfortunately, that these experiences track with a number of unfortunate realities that we all know should not happen in this country solely because you are Latino or Hispanic. As I indicated, unfortunately, when we talk about discrimination experiences, we don't mean just adults. In fact, the survey indicates that far too many Latino children face discrimination or bullying, again, only because they are Latino. You see Latino parents indicate that 20% of children across the country who are Latino have been bullied or shamed for speaking Spanish at school or on the playground. 21% have experienced discrimination or been treated unfairly at school or at their child care facilities because they are Hispanic or Latino or because of their skin color. And you see 11% have indicated that they've been treated unfairly in their neighborhood or where they live, again, because they are either Latino, Hispanic, or because of their skin color. So a very unfortunate reality that far too many Latino parents are having to deal with. And you see when they're faced with these experiences, we do find that a large segment of Latino parents actually do something about this occurrence, whether it's the 62% who've indicated that they actually confronted the person who was discriminating against their child, or the 56% who have indicated that they've talked to their child about racism or discrimination, or the 35% who who have indicated they've raised the issue with the school or the child care provider. The good reality of this is many Latino parents feel empowered to actually act on these experiences when they happen, but Latino parents should not have to feel like they need to be in a situation where they have to take ownership of this experience. We should not see Latino parents having to engage at this rate solely because their children are being discriminated because they are Latino or Hispanic. We found that parents fortunately value talking to their children about racism and discrimination. In fact, in the first Abriendo Puertas National Latino Family Survey, we also saw an indication that Latino parents overwhelmingly support that talking to their children at home about racism or discrimination that they may experience in their lives. And I think this is an important point that emphasizes that Latino parents are essentially taking ownership of the opportunity to speak with their kids about racism and race in the United States, which is again a positive outcome, but unfortunately is coming as a consequence of far too many of our families facing discrimination and racism in the United States. When we asked individuals to indicate whether or not, thinking about their own experiences growing up, if they believe that their children will face more or less discrimination, again, specifically because of being Latino or Hispanic, unfortunately, we see that far too many Latino parents think that they'll either be the same level of discrimination directed at their children that they faced themselves growing up, or even the 26% who indicate that there's going to be unfortunately more discrimination directed at their children that they even faced as children growing up. It's a strong indication, a reminder to all of us that unfortunately, even as we think about our own experiences and the difficulties we may face, this isn't going anywhere. And we're all going to have to do something collectively to try to improve the reality in the United States so that our children don't face those same experiences and we don't see multi-generational experiences with discrimination that we know leads to a lot of harm and well-being, diminishing for Latinos in particular. Latino parents believe that children should be exposed to content about race and racism in school curriculum. You see specifically 77, so over 3/4 of parents agree that it's important for children to learn about race and racism in the children's history classes. So it's a major talking point that I think we should all share with our own educational leadership to emphasize that we should be thinking about ways to introduce children to this important conversation in school so it reinforces what we're all doing with our children at home. And then the final theme that I'll share with you in terms of the data points generated from the survey focuses on the mental health challenges, unfortunately, that have increased for Latino families in particular since the outbreak of the pandemic. You see that an overwhelming majority of Latino parents and primary caregivers across the full sample indicate that they are at least slightly concerned about their own mental health as well as the mental health of their children. You see whether or not we cut the data by Spanish-speaking families, children with families with children 0 to 3 years of age, or expecting families, the overall result remains the same, that unfortunately there's a far high level of concern about mental health. And again, emphasizing that it's both the mental health of parents and primary caregivers as well as their children's mental health. A number of different important research papers have emphasized that unfortunately, this has been an increase since the outbreak of the pandemic, and the mental health challenges facing Latinos unfortunately comes at a time where Latinos were already the least likely of any racial and ethnic group in the United States to have access to mental health resources. And unfortunately, that inequality between Latinos and non-Latinos has only grown throughout the duration of the pandemic. When we asked individuals that are facing mental health challenges, what resources would they be able to take advantage of to manage the stress and anxiety that they're facing, you see that a range of different interventions have strong support from Latino families across the country to manage stress and anxiety, whether that's providing mechanisms for parents to have more personal time, whether that's meditation or exercise to help cope with the challenge that they're facing in their everyday lives, or emotional support and counseling or therapy. Again, recognizing that Latinos unfortunately face the greatest inequality in access to emotional support. That's something that is emphasized by Latino parents as a value. And figuring out mechanisms to provide financial counseling or coaching or educational counseling or coaching is particularly important to Latinos, as you saw from the economic well-being data, who are facing challenges at their own employment. So thinking about mental health being comprehensive is something that I think we want to push to policymakers, but because it includes things like financial counseling or coaching that will provide economic stability for Latino households across the country and minimize the stress and anxiety associated with not having enough resources to provide for your family. We also see that when we ask folks a number of other range of different resources that could help manage stress and anxiety, you see that at 43%, Latino parents and primary caregivers want more information on things they can do at home to reduce themselves and their children's stress and anxiety. So thinking about providing families with resources on things they can work on in their own home is something that obviously Latino parents value. And you see across the board, whether it's emotional support or counseling or more support from their childcare providers or teachers, Latino parents want to see access to things that they can actually run with and utilize to try to improve the overall mental health and well-being for themselves as well as their children. And finally, one data point that I think is incredibly important to end with, especially given the context of where we are with campaign season right now. Unfortunately, a sizable segment of Latinos right now are being exposed to anti-immigrant campaign ads. I know if you're paying attention to the news, you're being over-inundated with campaign ads right now, given the context of the election being right around the corner. Unfortunately, far too many of these television or online campaign ads are discriminatory towards Latinos and immigrants in particular. And you see whether it's the 42% of expecting families who indicate that they're being exposed to these negative campaign ads, or the 36%, so that's over a third of Latino families overall, who are being exposed to these anti-immigrant and anti-Latino campaign ads. We see from the survey that unfortunately this is having a number of different unfortunate and negative outcomes for Latinos. The one that I want to draw your attention to is, of those folks who have been exposed to these anti-immigrant campaign ads, 51% indicate that the thing that they think about when they're exposed to these advertisements is that it indicates to them that people like themselves are not wanted or valued here in the United States. So that sense of not being welcomed or part of the overall community, unfortunately, we know from a number of different academic research reports, is correlated with a number of different bad outcomes, including a reduction in mental health and a perception that their voice does not matter, which unfortunately leads to lower turnout rates for our Latino population across the country. So we all need to be thinking about how we might be able to minimize these anti-immigrant campaign ads so it doesn't harm more of our families who are unfortunately forced to see this type of content whenever they're watching television or streaming anything on social media. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague who will provide some reaction to this data that I hopefully has informed all of you who have been great audience members to participate in this webinar today.
Great. Thank you so much, Gabe. That is just such a robust set of data that we have at our fingertips now. And I think we're really just starting to scratch the surface in what the data and the information that parents and caregivers have given us to inform policy going forward. So I just want to again mention that this survey is part of our initial phase for our Latino Infant Initiative, which is a joint project of UnidosUS and Abriendo Puertas, and we will have more information and resources to come and share with you all in the future months. But I just want to share with you some key takeaways from where I sit, and Gabe alluded to a lot of sobering statistics and data that parents shared with us. So I have 4 main themes that I want to just underscore. The first, of course, the economy, which is on top of everyone's mind. And this really tracks with a lot of national polls and data that we've seen. And Latino parents are no exception. The economy is really impacting and driving what families are facing and the hard decisions that they're having to make. Second, we see that parents, time and time again, at all levels of education, place a high value on their children's opportunities for education and their development from a very young age. Thirdly, again, child safety, which has risen really to the top of many parents' minds and concerns. We know that parents have a lot to say about that topic these days. And then fourth, we see a lot of intersectionality with respect to how a child's learning and development can be impacted from access to basic needs such as food and nutrition and healthcare for Latino families, and also the discrimination that their children and families are facing for being Latinos. So first, I'll just do a little bit of a deeper dive on the economic factors. We know that the economy, again, inflation, wages, these are the top 3 issues that parents and caregivers shared with us. And again, that's no surprise. And what was really kind of disheartening for me is hearing that about 1/3 of those who were surveyed have had to postpone their child's activities due to those economic challenges. Because I know that in recent focus groups that UnidosUS has conducted with our affiliate network, Latino parents have shared with us again and again the dreams and aspirations that they have for their children, and the fact that they have to forego those developmental opportunities for their children because they can't afford to do so, even after borrowing money and using up their savings. It's really, really a setback for many families. We also know that parents told us that about 40% are extremely concerned that they won't be able to provide a good future for their children. And again, that is just sobering and disheartening, because parents want the very best for their children and make many sacrifices along the way to be able to provide for educational opportunities for their kids. And we know that education is an equalizer to upward mobility, and that without early education and developmental opportunities, children are at a disadvantage without access to that from an early age by the time that they enter kindergarten. And again, Gabe talked about some of the cross-cutting data that we were able to do with this survey, and we did see even more impactful challenges for Spanish-speaking families as well as expecting families. For example, about 1/3 of expecting parents told us that they had to cut back on health-related expenses, which is very worrisome considering the importance of prenatal health care to ensure the well-being of both the mothers and their babies. And again, we know that the economic situation for many families has worsened over the past year. And unfortunately, with the potential of a recession in the coming year, as Gabe said, many families have already tapped into their savings, already having to take out loans or borrow from friends or family. So we really need to make sure that we are doing everything we can, and that there are government supports and interventions to make sure that families don't fall even further off the cliff. The second takeaway, the high value that parents place on their children's education. Again, we saw that, yes, economic issues are top of mind for many parents, but so is education. And that really speaks again to the high value that parents place to make sure that their children have every opportunity to succeed. We know that educators, especially in the early childhood field, are not recognized and compensated for the professionals that they are and the role that they play in society to develop our children. UnidosUS released a report in 2020, right before the pandemic, called Latina Teachers and the VA Challenge, which found that 1 in 5 early childhood educators are Latina. And we want to make sure that we continue to retain and support a diversified, culturally responsive, and linguistically prepared workforce. And we have to take a really hard look at how we're treating a workforce that is overrepresented by women of color, because this is truly a racial and gender equity issue. But we are heartened to see that most Latino parents, about 90%, support funding for early childhood educators to earn their degrees, which is consistent with the fact that they place a high priority on a workforce that is well-trained and has the expertise to teach their children. And that 91% support increasing teacher salary and benefits, because we know that from the Department of Labor, the median hourly rate for childcare workers is only $13. And the annual salary is only about $27,000, which really doesn't go very far. We have childcare workers who are living paycheck to paycheck and who cannot afford to stay in a field and a job that they truly, truly love. And we're seeing far too many childcare centers, including in our own network, having to face with staffing shortages. And unfortunately, we are seeing many childcare centers across the country having to shut their doors. We know that also most parents believe that the first year of their child's life is highly important for their development. And that I think it's truly a strong data to uphold, because for parents, especially Latino parents, right? Like learning and schooling doesn't start at pre-K or kindergarten. It starts at year one. And so that's why it's so important that we have investments and supports for children at a very early age to start developing their learning and their social emotional development. And so about 90% of parents do support government funding to expand early Head Start for children 3 years and younger. And that's something that we really need to continue to advance and push forward. The third theme of child safety, again, that was a very sobering statistic. I almost had to do a double take when I saw that 1/5 of Latino parents have said that they or their children have already experienced gun violence. And, you know, this is a different time than when I went to school. You know, this is the reality that our children, the parents who are sending their children to school, are facing each and every day. And it's really hard to wrap one's head around. This is unacceptable. There's much more that needs to be done. And again, we heard from parents that about 90% that they believe that their state policymakers should do more to prevent school shootings. We know that Congress and President Biden were able to enact bipartisan legislation at the federal level, but there's also actions that can be taken at the state level. And we know that, unfortunately, you know, this is an issue that has hit close to home for a lot of Latino families, including in our own community in Uvalde, Texas, which we have in our network affiliates on the ground there that know these families, that have supported these families, and will continue to do so for a long time to come, because that's going to have long-term effects on an entire community. And then lastly, I also want to just talk a bit about some of the intersectional issues, but focusing primarily on the discrimination that is being faced by Latino and Spanish speakers. And so Gabe shared that about 1/5 of children under 5 have been already at such a young age discriminated in a school setting, both for their race and ethnicity, and also for speaking their home language. And we know that parents are not shying away from discussions about race at home. About 3/4 believe that it's important to teach their children about the history of race and racism, because it is something that they are experiencing and their children are experiencing in their everyday lives. And 60% also believe that these conversations are important, even with children from such a young age. Half of expecting parents also say that they felt like they weren't welcome in the US in response to anti-immigration ads, which I see every day. And the fact is that most Latinos in the US and the vast majority of children under 18 are US born citizens who were born right here in the United States of America, yet still face the challenge of having a lack of sense of belonging and have to deal with the perception of being seen as other or foreign when this is our home. And just to wrap things up, because again, there's just so much data to unpack in this survey, and this is just the initial preliminary set of data that we're sharing with you all. You know, we believe that this information can really serve as a resource, not only for advocates, but also for policymakers and even candidates who are running for office now and hope to hold an office in public service. So this isn't just important to discuss leading up to elections, but also during, between, and then post-elections, because there's a lot that needs to be done, and families are telling us what the challenges and the needs are, but also offering solutions at the same time. So with that, I will just end my share out of some of my observations and insights from the data, and I will kick it back to Adrián.
Thank you, Amalia, for those insights and for your partnership, you know, for UnidosUS's work over the years and on this specific Latino infant initiative. Thanks to Dr. Gabe Sanchez for, I'm always amazed at how you get through so many slides and such valuable information and data so effectively. As what's been said, by this panel conversation, there's a lot of important data that was shared. It's preliminary data and early data, I should say. There's a lot more that will be coming from us. We'll be having another webinar post-election to actually present some specific policy solutions and things that we've already started sharing today, giving you a little bit of a glimpse about that Latino families are saying, right, here are the things that we need to see in order for us to work through some of these challenges that we presented today. And so that's the exciting part of all this, is we kind of have, looked at some of the sobering data today. Latino families are saying specifically, here are the things that we need, here are the things that we're looking towards, here are our strengths, our language, the culture, our bilingualism, really our focus, as Amalia said, on educational success for our children, how we view quality, early childhood and educational services. So there's a lot that we will be sharing with you all, and we really want this to be a resource for you just to continue those conversations in your communities at the local level. You all do such important work on the ground with families, and we hope that these data points will just support you as you dialogue with families, as we ask and we look to families to really share their experiences, so we look towards collective solutions together. I will ask one question that came in, and there were questions throughout just about whether or not we're gonna share the slides. And yes, we share the slides and also the recording of this, so we'll be emailing that out to folks. We know that UnidosUS will also be hosting this information on a landing page, and we'll be sending that out to folks that'll follow over the next 2 weeks. So we'll be sending that information out. And we have a question that came in, and just want to give it to our presenters here by Reeve Mora. Thank you, Reeve, for joining. How do we ensure that parents can be a part of these policy-making decisions? And how do we make them feel comfortable and what the laws are? And then there's a last part, I'll just ask it all together. Also, what with the new policies proposed, how do we understand what they are proposing and what it means to parents? So there's three kind of parts to that. How do we engage, right, parents around policy decisions? How do we make them feel comfortable about the laws, right? So that trust that the laws will be implemented effectively, and then how can we help families to understand new policies and what it means specifically to their everyday lives?
I'll start, and please fill in any gaps if I will. I mean, for those of us who have access to the ballot box, I mean, the most obvious mechanism this time of year to make your voice heard is voting. I was fortunate to be able to drop by the voting booth today. You see, I got my I voted sticker on. The conversation about the under turnout of Latinos, I'm a political scientist, so I spend most of my days these days tracking polling. If you're paying attention, the national media is already framing a narrative that Latinos aren't voting at high rates and almost blaming us before the election even happens for the outcomes. We all can overcome that consistent narrative of the sleeping giant of the Latino population and electorate by just voicing our opinion through voting. That is the most obvious mechanism, and is obviously incredibly important regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. How do we infuse trust is a very complicated one, primarily because I was writing a report this morning focused on how much misinformation is directed at the Latino community, specifically in Spanish. There's much more of that this election cycle than I've ever seen before in tracking this in any other election cycle. So we have to be very cognizant that if you're seeing something on social media and it does not sound right to you, make sure you verify the accuracy of that data, whether it's about politics or policy, because a lot of the information is unfortunately being misleading, directed specifically at us as the Latino community. So turn to organizations like UnidosUS, who is a trusted partner, right? Those folks, you can trust the information that's coming from them. Make sure that you verify anything you hear with those organizations that we know are looking out for the betterment of our community.
And I'll just quickly add, as I know we're coming to the end of our time, but parents are an integral part of this project that Unidos and Abriendo Puertas are working on to support parents who have children from prenatal to to 3 in particular, to make sure that they have that support from the very beginning. Parents have to be at the table. You know, policies shouldn't be something that happen to them, but with them. And so we are making sure that we are working intentionally and meaningfully and authentically engaging partners, parents as partners, equal partners in this effort. So we'll be sure to, you know, continue to integrate them into the work as experts, because they are experts, right? They are with their children every day. They're seeing what's happening, and they also have ideas and solutions for how we could better improve opportunities for families. So with that, more to come on that, but definitely parents have to be at the core of the work that we do.
Well, that's a perfect closing, Amalia, and a reminder that we will be in contact with each of you, our partners, to engage you throughout the process, and that this will be done in partnership. This work will be done in partnership with you, stakeholders, partners, and especially families. So with that, I just want to thank you all once again for joining us for this 1-hour webinar. You'll be hearing from us. We have your contact information, and so we'll be sending you additional information about the upcoming webinar in November after the elections, and as well as this recorded webinar and the slides. I would like to just put up our contact information here, that you have our email addresses. So if you'll stick around a second here, this last slide, if you have any specific questions around the data, around this initiative, Latino Infant Initiative, or any questions about our specific organizations, please feel free to reach out to Amalia, Gabe, or myself, Adrián, at Abriendo Puertas, UnidosUS, and BSP Research. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.